You're mute. Check that mute on the bottom left, like I always told you.
Hi, Michaela.
Hello, Kathy. How are you?
Oh, great. So good to put a face and a name together.
Same here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
Good.
Yeah.
Can you see my PowerPoints from where you're at?
And stress management.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
So I always like to start promptly at 4. I mean, they know what time this is to gear up. So I might give them a couple minutes, but we want to start promptly at 4. You good with that?
Absolutely.
We've got some folks who are joining right now, which is great.
Chat box. I'm just delighted that it's working.
Me too. Me too. Technology is great when it works. I'm seeing some friends who are coming on in.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
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 Look at you. You look so like professional. Got the earphones on and everything.
I have everybody at home doing Zoom, so I'm trying to keep from the noise coming in.
I understand. Yeah. So we go from one extreme to another, like with that, we thought, oh my gosh, we were going to get all this snow and bad weather. Wasn't so bad. And now today we've got sunshine, which is all good.
Yeah, definitely, surprisingly.
Yeah. Everybody doing Christmas shopping this year? Or are we all just ordering online?
More online for me. So, most of my crew is big, so I just give them gift cards now so they grown up. So I can't do the little kids shopping no more, except for my god baby. I'm a godmother now, so had to get something for her.
Yeah. That's kind of like how we are too. It's like we did have little ones to buy for, but they're not that little anymore.
Yeah, it's going for me. I put together anyway.
Yeah. Well, we got 4 minutes. And we're going to be really respectful of everybody's time. And I'm just going to float this out. We're not going to go till 6 o'clock. I'm not going to do that. That would be stressful for Michaela. 2 hours is a long time to fill.
It passes quicker than you'd think. I've done it before.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. Sometimes though, if you go too long, then it's like you lose people.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How are you? I'm connecting from my phone. If it's not clear, let me know so I can go to a laptop.
What's that?
Who is that person?
This is Fida. Anybody see me?
I can't see you. We can hear you, Fida.
You can hear me, but you can't see me.
That's
Can't
right.
see you.
Oh, we can see you now.
All right, I guess my internet was just... See me now. Everything's good?
We can see you. I don't want y'all to see me, so.
Is that
Okay,
Carla?
that's the thing. I can't see anybody. It's just giving me a blank screen, but of the names
Mm-hmm.
of the people attending, but I can't see anybody.
Can
But
you
you
see
can-
the presentation, Fida?
Can you see the PowerPoint? Mhm.
Oh, I think we lost her.
Carly, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I just have my camera turned off because my hair is not done.
Okay.
It's been a true working from home day, let me tell you.
Like it. That's going to be me tomorrow. That's the best kind, working from home day. Oh, it's wear your pajamas to work day. Well, hopefully people get on when they're supposed to. Thanks for showing up a little early.
Hey, where's your laptop? Does it have a password on it?
Sarah, I'm gonna take this time and say hi real fast. I haven't seen you since the summer. What's up, girl?
Hey, Jordan.
How are you? Megan and I were just talking about you the other day.
I hope all good things. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Always good things. Oh, Nico's on here too. What's up?
Hey, Nico. Hey, Megan.
Hi, guys.
Oh, we have 28 participants. Woohoo.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Karen. It's 4 o'clock, guys. We're going to start pretty soon. I just shared a little secret. We're not going to go till 6 o'clock, so you know. 34. Okay, people are hopping on.
Everyone, I know we're going to go ahead and get this started. I'm Amy Clayton Smith. Hi, Ms. Walker. Thanks for being with us today.
Hello, thank you so much.
I'll let Kathy introduce you, but I know we're at a little bit of a time crunch, so we'll go ahead, and if we can go ahead and get things started, that would be great. So I'll let Kathy introduce you.
Yeah, I'm all about starting on time, being respectful of folks' time. It is 4 o'clock. And I'm really so very thankful that we have Michaela Walker with us today from Meridian Healthcare. She is a graduate of Ohio Northern with a BS in Public Health, 2017, so she's a youngster. She's credentialed in preventative chemical dependency by the state of Ohio, among other things. I also want to just let you know that Meridian Healthcare is a nonprofit that she works for, and they are accredited in integrated behavioral and primary health care. They've been in our area for 45 years, so they are really good folks. They do great things for our families. And of course, you can see today, our topic is stress management. We want to take care of all of you and the children that we serve. So Michaela, it's all yours. I am going to.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Interrupt for 1 second. Hey, just everybody, if you can please mute your microphones because I'm hearing some back noise. We'd appreciate that. So please mute your microphone.
Sounds good. All right, Amy, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And it's nice to put faces with names, finally, for all of you guys. Welcome. Today, we're talking about stress management. And as Kathy said, she is absolutely right. I have not been in this field as long as many of you have. And so I appreciate if you all have questions, if you all have comments, please feel free. I think I have it set up so I can see if you raise your hand or not. I will try to make you available. If not, just you can start talking and I take no offense to that. But does anyone have any questions before we get started? If you notice I'm talking really quickly, feel free to say so. Can everyone hear me all right? Making sure everything's good on your guys' end? Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I can be a fast talker, so I'm gonna try to make this as clear as possible. So I wanted to approach stress management today from a couple of angles. Will my slides move? That's the question now. Have it on here. Gonna move that way. Okay, 1 second. My slides are up, however, they are not moving. So I will go to, oh, there we go. Just had to think about it. I wanted to provide you all with an overview of what we're doing today. I like to hear what we're going to talk about. We talk about it, and then we talked about what we talked about. It's a good way to get multiple instances of the same information. So I've divided everything into about 4 parts today. Our first part is about stress in adolescence, which from what I understand is the primary group that everyone here works with. Our second part is we're going to be talking about creating a stress conscious environment. And I want to talk, it's on here, you might see the subpoint, why not stress-free? Because we would prefer everything be stress-free, but is that really the healthiest option? Our third part is going to be on managing your personal stress, my personal stress. When I develop these talks, I think about what I need to hear as a professional, and I try to share that with all of you. So please, especially feel free if you have any questions in that area. I'm going to focus on that. And then our fourth part is coping and managing our stress in 4 different areas. And all areas that don't necessarily include things like, getting a massage or oh, just use a stress ball. We try to focus on things that you can do easily in your home and with limited resources. So let's get started. So our first part is stress in adolescence. And we all know young people, right? I consider myself a young person. And so I take no offense when you say that my brain has just recently been developed, which is, it's very true. I like this little comic. The mom says, do you think it's true that humans only use 3% of their brains? And they look at their son and his friend and they said, we just invented tomato hockey. And the dad says, I think less, right? And certainly, because I've been given the privilege of working with adolescents, I've gotten to really understand and dive deep into how adolescent brains work. And they work a little bit differently than ours. There's a lot more similarities, I think, than we think, but the actual brain chemistry is slightly different. The reason why I like to approach talking about the adolescent brain first is because I follow the biopsychosocial model of health. Has anyone heard that before? You can just raise your hand or give a little wave if you're familiar with that term of the biopsychosocial model of health. It's where we take into account how our bodies work, how our minds work, and the places, the environments that we're in that determine how healthy we are in the long term. So welcome to the brain. I was actually, before I majored in public health, I was a nursing student for a short amount of time. And so these are all my old friends. I had to memorize them, but it's really fascinating to look at how the brain works in the human body. So I'm not going to go through all of these just for the sake of time, but I wanted to give you guys a tour. So what we're mainly talking about today is activities that happen in your frontal lobe, and that's that front portion, the yellow colored portion on that screen that you see. And in our frontal lobe, it controls a lot of our personality and our behaviors and our emotions, and things like judging, planning, and problem solving all continue to develop in the frontal lobe, in your frontal lobe. You can also control things like body movements And concentration, self-awareness, all those are housed in that portion of our brain. My mom, who was a pharmacist, used to say, that's why I really don't want you all to get a concussion. It's because damage to that area of the brain can be critical, especially for the developing brain. Does anybody happen to know how long our brains continue to develop? Any guesses? I don't see any hands up, which is totally fine. So let's move forward then. The brain actually continues much longer than we usually anticipate. We talk about puberty a lot of times, and that's the hormonal changes that bring about your secondary sex characteristics. But your brain continues that rewiring process until you're about 25 years old. So when I told you at the beginning of this talk that I am a relatively recent developed brain, I'm not making that up. I really have only recently reached maturity in that area of human anatomy. So when I'm talking about adolescence, especially when it comes to brain development oh, I'm sorry, I just noticed there's some guesses. Thank you, Nico, very much. 27 is really close. I didn't see another one. 25, you have it. Good job, Taylor. Yeah, that's really good. So that happens until you're about 25. And so when we're talking about adolescence, we see that development happening from ages 10 to about 24. And so the way I see adolescence is a lot different than most people see adolescence, where they just see a teenager, right? All right. Moving on. Oh, did it freeze on me again? It's probably going to do a ton at once. Just watch. Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay. So why talk about the brain in adolescence when we're talking about managing stress? Well, because stress starts in the brain, essentially. Stress happens to us. Things cause us stress, but it's really how our brains react to stress. And that's how we understand how stress works. So I was trying to look at some reasons. Why do adolescents experience stress differently than adults do? Now, you're going to see some things that I think are universally applicable. We all experience stress if we are, say, put in a new environment. But in the adolescent brain, everything is so new and still continuing to develop. And so we see physical changes happening in the adolescent body. Obviously, you have your hormonal changes and the development of secondary sex characteristics. That awkward phase really is awkward for everybody. You see accelerated growth. Not only is that difficult on a mental and emotional side, but it can cause pain. I remember growing very rapidly as a child. You can't tell, but I'm 5'11". My bones hurt constantly just from all of the growing that I had to do. And then not only just in your body, but your brain continuing to develop, you have that integration of your neurocognitive and behavioral processes. That's a lot of really fancy words for just for saying that your synapses in the brain, the things that control that communication between one side of the brain and the other, they're continuing to grow, right? They're strengthening their bonds, they're strengthening their signals. And so your capabilities in attention and focus, your working memory, things like self-regulation and control, those are still developing even up into age 25. And it's not a hard stop. People can still develop after age 25, but that's generally when we see brain maturation. And then the social and emotional changes that adolescents experience are unique. You might have noticed I put unique in this slide because we all experience stress, but how do adolescents experience stress in ways that are different than the way an adult might experience stress? So you have a very swiftly changing social environment. The transition from elementary school to middle school, and then from middle school to high school is extreme. And certainly now with the presence of the pandemic, students have been facing a wide variety of changes at stages that haven't normally gone through changes. So very, very young students are now having to cope with using technology in a way that works for them, which I struggle with. I'm sure you all can sympathize. There's also a sharp increase in your demand on your organizational skills, especially in those school transitions. You start having to take care of your own schedule. You have to be responsible for your own homework. It's part of those difficult things about growing up. I remember I used to holler, I said, "Where's my shoes?" I would forget my shoes everywhere. And as I grew older, I was expected to remember where I put my shoes or where I left my laptop or things like that. It causes stress on a pretty constant basis when those skills are new and not yet developed. Peer pressure, while we all face it, adolescents, it's pretty new. So they don't have a lot to go back on and look and say, oh, I handled this situation. Everything is new. Every situation, every instance is a new experience for an adolescent. And we're going to talk more about the pressures that are also present to the adolescent, their need to fit in. It doesn't necessarily matter which group. Everybody wants to feel like they are part of a group. I feel like we can all understand that. Even in our adulthood, we form friend groups. We do, there are groups at our workplaces. There's groups in the social activities that we do. Humans are social animals or social creatures, and we need human interaction. And that need for being part of a group is really, really strong when those brains are developing. An adolescent also will develop their capability to weigh those risks and rewards. And that goes back to that frontal lobe that we were talking about. You also have parts of your brain, I'm not going to flip to the slide and you guys can look later, but you have parts of the brain that are responsible for understanding fear. And from a biological standpoint, fear keeps you safe, right? When we used to hunt for our food, I'm very glad I don't have to hunt for food. I'd be terrible. I'd be starving. When people hunted for food, that fear kept them safe. If they ran into a predator that was larger than them, fear of the predator elicited the flight or fight response, which many of you may have heard before, where fight or flight says, get away from it as fast as you can, or try to deal with the situation in front of you. A test nowadays for a middle school student will still elicit that flight or fight response. They're not necessarily in danger, but our brains are developed to handle that kind of danger. And so that's why we sometimes get very extreme responses to stress, especially from adolescents, as they don't know it, but they're trying to keep themselves safe. Additionally, young people are developing their ability to engage in metacognition. All that is our awareness and understanding of how our brains work and how they think and why. So when we talk to other adults, we're pretty used to having conversations that go something like, you know what, my significant other made me really mad last night. And I was mad because they failed to wash the dishes. We understand why we feel the feelings that we feel, or to some extent. Nobody's perfect and everyone continues to develop that. But we really do understand why we feel what we feel. A child and young adolescents do not always understand why they feel what they feel. It's a learning process. And a lot of what I do as an educator is help equip young people with those words and those tools that they need to be able to say, oh, I feel angry when I am feeling my stomach upset. A lot of kids will say, well, I feel bad. And that could be a lot of different things. And so that metacognition allows us to understand how our thoughts work and kind of understand our own selves on a deeper level. So adolescents not only have unique bodies and situations, they experience stress uniquely to adults. So we have a lot of inward feelings that will express themselves outwardly. And so you will probably recognize a lot of the outwards expressions of stress in adolescence. So if a young person thinks they have difficulty in understanding the changes in their body and the feelings that they're going through, just that teenage awkwardness, that outward expression could result in things like moodiness or outbursts of anger. A lot of times, especially because communication is a skill that must be learned, it's not a natural skill for most of us, there's a lack of communication. And parents oftentimes, if you're a parent, I'm sure you can understand and sympathize, they'll say, well, my child won't talk to me about what's wrong. It's because they haven't necessarily learned how to talk yet about their issues, about their problems. There can be a really strong desire of wanting to hide because of stress, because of that anxiety. If an adolescent feels compelled to fit in or to belong to a particular group, or even to distance themselves from a particular group. That can result in anxiety about their appearance, anxiety about their social status. Online presence is a really large part of social status with adolescents today. The young people that I generally work with are between the middle and high school age. And a lot of times they don't necessarily have friend groups in their school. Their friend groups are involved in things that they are also involved in online. It might be a friend group that they've connected with through gaming, or they might have a friend group that they've connected with via other platforms. So it's not just about who they interact with personally. A lot of it is who they interact with online. And certainly online bullying does contribute to current stress as well. Changes in communication habits. So if you have a adolescent who normally is very outgoing and they become very withdrawn, that could be kind of a sign that they are experiencing stress. Or a normally withdrawn adolescent withdrawing further or changing their communication habits in some way. Perhaps they're not communicating with certain people as much as they used to. That's another sign of stress. You'll see changes in eating and sleeping patterns when adolescents are stressed. That is one of the quickest, the ones that I tend to notice the most personally, but it may not be for you. That's completely fine. But adolescents, and that can go on both sides. They can eat more than they're generally accustomed to or much less. Everyone's a little bit different. The same happens with sleeping. And I actually we're going to talk about sleep a little bit later. The lack of sleep, and the lack of sleep sometimes due to those physical changes. Those of you who have looked into adolescent development before are probably already aware that our sleep and wake cycles tend to get a little off in adolescence. We tend to stay up a little bit later and want to wake up later. And as we age, as we change, it's not quite as dramatic, but that change in sleeping pattern plus the pressures and the requirements of a traditional school schedule are really taxing on an adolescent's body and therefore cause stress. An adolescent that is fearful of being inadequate at a lot of things, often this is because their skills are not fully developed. So most of the adolescents that I have communicated with, have talked to, they're very hard on themselves. And they tend to set themselves to pretty high standards. And sometimes they don't allow themselves to understand that they are still growing and they are still developing in the skills that they have. And so they look at themselves, and because they are not a pro level football player, or because they're not an amazing speaker yet, that they've failed at life. We know certainly that this isn't the case. But keep in mind, an adolescent is grappling with the fact that they don't know why they can't achieve these things quite yet. So that can lead to a fear of new situations, new activities. They can feel withdrawn and experience low self-esteem or self-worth. This is a very, very important factor in a lot of students that I work with, and their stress levels is that they on the outside can seem pretty accomplished, but a lot of them do deal with low self-esteem, which is an issue. I'm going to pause. Is there any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty quick. Oh, absolutely. Even adults too. Thank you, Kathy. I didn't exactly see what comment that was, but many of the things that we've applied here also apply to adults. And that's why I decided to talk about adolescents first, because I was going to say about the same thing about adults. And I thought, well, why not just, get two birds with one stone? So moving on. Oops, there we go. Moving on to our second part in our conversation today, we want to create stress-conscious environments. And you're like, what's that? A stress-conscious environment is one that is aware of the stress, but also understanding that stress is normal and a certain amount of stress is healthy in our lives. And I know this sounds a little weird. I'm sure we all know people, maybe you're one of those person. I will outwardly say that sometimes I'm that person. Stress becomes a competition. Who's more stressed, right? You get together with your friends and you say, oh, I'm so stressed. And your friend says, oh, I'm really stressed too. And it becomes who is more stressed, right? I'm sure we've all been in that situation. For others, it's a stigma to be avoided at all costs. I want stress-free recipes and a stress-free life. And I go on vacation and I want to sit by the pool and be stress-free. Well, we all talk about that, and that's absolutely true. And I do the same thing. I don't want to add any more stress than I have to in my life. But it takes a little bit of altered thinking to understand that some amount of stress is actually healthy for us. And that's what we actually call eustress. Oh, okay. I just got a note that says we've removed the 40-minute time limit on your group meeting. Thank you, Zoom. All right, I'll say I love it. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, but we still won't take the 2 hours, I promise. So if you'll see on that little, the bell curve graph that I've included, we actually find that there is an optimum amount of stress that humans experience, and that helps us achieve what we call peak performance. We're able to think our best, work our hardest, and accomplish the most when we actually have some healthy stress in our lives. That's also called eustress. It's actually spelled EUSTRESS. I don't think I included that on the slide, but we feel focused and motivated. When we don't have enough stress, because I often ask students, I said, what would you do if there was no stress? And they kick back and they go, oh, that'd be great. And we often think the same thing. We say, oh, that'd be fantastic to have no stress. But if we have no stress, we get bored. Humans get bored. We are inactive. We can sometimes develop a low self-esteem if we're not accomplishing things due to that healthy amount of stress. So it's not a good thing to have no stress. On the other opposite side of the scale, however, we don't want constant stress. That's when you start seeing that red, the red and orange area. We experience fatigue when we are overstressed, we're exhausted. That's an overload. Now, at different points of our lives, we are all going to have stress overload. It's pretty much inevitable. What we really want to avoid is getting into that breakdown phase. And most of you, I'm sure, have experienced breakdown due to too much stress. That's when our anxiety panic sets in. We experience emotions such as anger, and actually even our physical wellness tends to decline. I had a best friend in high school who, when we would go together we did competitions and we'd go, and she was always sick. For every tournament we went to, I was a high school debater, and she always had a cold or the flu. And we started understanding that her body, in response to stress of competition and things like that, her immune system went out and she always picked up some kind of bug. And so it's not the same for everybody, but certainly we experience a wearing out when we are stressed, especially for a long period of time. Most of us can sustain stress overload for very short periods of time. And that's a good thing. We need to be able to be flexible, but we cannot experience stress overload for a long period of time. Think closer to a few weeks to months and onwards. All right. So we know that some stress is actually healthy for us and necessary. And that's something that I think when talking to adolescents about stress is really important to get across, is that a lot of times, what do we hear about stress in the media? We hear that stress is just a bad thing. But it's more about helping an adolescent manage their stress, keep it at that optimum area in that yellow and green zone where they are able to do their best, but not be overstressed, to have a balanced lifestyle. So I understand, and please feel free to jump in if you guys have comments or certain situations that you have as examples. But I work with students sometimes on a more personal basis, but I also work with large groups of students. And so I have tried to include things that you guys can help with when you are working with students, when you're working with adolescents, that can help you create a stress conscious environment instead of a stress-free environment. And it takes a few key elements. Number one, you have to understand that you cannot eliminate stress from a student's environment as much as you want to. As much as you want to have a student come into whatever activity you're doing or whatever thing you're teaching that student, you can't eliminate all that stress. It's still going to be there. But there are things that you can do, and I have those in green. So you can help monitor that environment that you have some control over for unnecessary stressors, things that don't have to be there, and provide an environment that is stress conscious. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. You can remind students that the only person who can control the student's reaction to the environment stressors is that student. One of the things that I really try to convey to my students is that that self-awareness and their ability to have control over themselves. I didn't mention this earlier, but another thing that adolescents experience is they find themselves in a spot where they're obviously not an adult yet, and they don't have all of the responsibilities and privileges of being an adult, but they're not a child. And they can make a lot of responsibility, make a lot of decisions for themselves. And so adolescents can experience stress by not feeling like they have a say in what's going on. And so I try to give them as much say as I possibly can. I try to help them understand that they are their own bosses. They can make decisions for themselves. They're not going to be perfect, and nobody expects them to be perfect, but we can help students make healthy decisions now, so that hopefully as adults, they can continue to make healthy decisions. And when I say healthy decisions, I mean that they are healthy physically, but also mentally and emotionally as well. And then finally, you can also provide support for healthy coping mechanisms and alternatives to unhealthy coping mechanisms. One thing I talk about a lot with my students, and you will see later on in our talk today, are different ways to deal with stress. Some are healthy and some are unhealthy. There is nobody who doesn't deal with stress, and we all do that in some ways. Can you think of, and feel free, I'm actually looking at the chat box now. If you have any ideas, what would be like an unhealthy coping mechanism that we could use? Give you guys a break from listening to my voice for a second. Unhealthy coping mechanisms. Oh, substances, absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Nico. And that's a really big one that I focus in on with anger, yes, food, that I focus in with my students, since I am a substance abuse prevention educator. And a lot of times that is an appeal very early on, that this may not even fix the problem, but if they think it can help, even in a short term, there's a temptation to try that. Binge eating, absolutely. And that sounds exactly like my students. And so there are some things that can even be a little bit of both. If we engage in that coping mechanism to excess, it could be an unhealthy coping mechanism like food. But if we're not eating and getting adequate nutrition, that's also unhealthy. So there's a lot of negative and there's a lot of positive coping mechanisms. And so self-harm, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, or Leisha, I apologize. Yeah, that's a really big one. And so if you have a student who is engaging in an unhealthy coping mechanism in a group setting, or while you're with that student, instead of, obviously we want to try to correct that behavior, but try to provide an alternative. For an example, I actually had a student one time who was, she was engaging in what we consider to be a mild form of self-harm. She was tearing the skin at her cuticles, and I have done this in the past. I tend to do that a little bit when I'm stressed. And so instead of just telling her to stop doing the behavior, I tried to find something that she could do that was a coping mechanism that would help her not need to do the unhealthy coping mechanism. So I rummaged around in my bag, and I actually usually have little stress balls with me at most times, or something that is okay to squeeze and touch, because there are just some people, I am one of those people, who really benefit from physical movement as a stress reliever. So, and it's not just identifying negative, but trying to provide a positive in that place. Let's see. Okay, so how are we conscious of stress in our groups and when we're working with young adults and adolescents? So you're going to see on the slides, I have in groups and I have one-on-one, because sometimes our behaviors are a little bit different, especially when it comes to managing large groups of students. So how do we prevent stress in the students that we have for, in my case, a relatively short amount of time? In groups, I try to be really aware of visual or audio stressors, such as loud music or another group nearby. I try to make sure I know my environment beforehand, so that if there are, say the band is practicing outside the school that I'm working in, maybe I can find a spot that's not right by the window, that it can help eliminate some of those stressors. If there has been a lot of testing lately in the school system, I know this year's a little different. But if there's been something that has impacted the students in that school specifically, I try to be really aware of what's going on and adjust my lessons and expectations appropriately. If there was a traumatic event that happened at the school, I can't walk in expecting everybody to be excited or happy to see me in any way. I have to walk in expecting that we might have to talk about some things that might be difficult to talk about. So just try to know your environment and make sure that you're not allowing excess stressors. If there's other groups of students, trying to find a good spot away from that. Make sure that you try to give your students the opportunity to participate, but we never want to force students to participate. Make sure also that the information that you encourage your students, if they're playing a game, for example, and doing kind of get to know you questions, make sure that they're aware that the information that they share should be safe for everybody to hear. I do a lot of lessons on establishing healthy boundaries. And knowing what is safe to share in a group environment is part of establishing healthy boundaries and can reduce stress for all the students involved. I know a lot of students who have become very stressed after hearing another student share a traumatic event. Now, I'm not saying that that student should not share the event. It should just be done in the appropriate setting. And I'm sure that you guys have all gone through trainings that help you identify who are those people to talk to, those licensed healthcare professionals, school counselors, nurses. Obviously, a lot of you may also be those people, and I understand that. But teaching students who to go to when they have those very, very personal things to share is something that can reduce the stress of the entire group situation. Let's see, we want to be consistent. That's another thing that I have learned sometimes the hard way with dealing with large groups of students, or not necessarily large, but even any group of student, is that if I am not consistent with the rules I set in place, or if I'm not consistent with monitoring behavior of certain students, then the stress level will rise. And students, they pick up on that. And if a student feels stressed in your group or in your whatever type of activity you're trying to conduct, then they're not going to be a student that is able to learn as well as they could if they were not stressed. So it's part of, to me, it's about providing the best education, the best care I can for this particular student if I help them avoid stress while they're in my group. So try to monitor students and their words or actions, be consistent. If you've called out one student for, using an offensive name to call somebody, or maybe they're just, misbehaving, try to make sure that you are consistently doing that and keep your rules consistent. It's easy to be lax and just say, well, sure, you can go ahead and do this. But consistency helps reduce stress, especially for adolescents. If they know what's coming next, then they're less likely to be worried about what's coming next. And then obviously praise those positive behaviors you see and avoid addressing any misbehaviors or any negative behaviors in a group setting. That should be done privately. That should be done between you and the student, and ask questions. Every opportunity is one that can be learned from. And I know a lot of times I have dealt with students where maybe they have lashed out because they've been stressed. And that's given us the opportunity to talk about why they were stressed and maybe some ways that they can help manage that stress to avoid the same reaction the next time. And then on that one-on-one basis, make sure that you are helping students, like I was just saying, identify the cause of stress. Finding physical terms can be helpful because a lot of times, like I said earlier, a student might say, well, I feel bad. But that could be a lot of things. That could be anxious, that could be remorseful, that could be hungry. And so, and that could also very easily be stressed. And so understanding those physical symptoms of stress, such as upset stomach. A lot of students are going to be sore necks, sore shoulders from clenching their muscles. I've known some students who actually clench their teeth at night and then have sore jaws in the morning because of stress. A lot of times they'll have physical reactions such as headaches as well. So that's also very common. So understanding those physical signs of stress can almost give students more confidence in understanding that, yes, they are stressed and that's okay and that's normal. I, at all costs, and this can be I think a lot of times I grew up in an environment where I was encouraged, you know, hey, don't worry about it. This will go away, calm down, it's fine. Some of you can probably understand, you can almost hear your mom or dad saying, you know, it's all right, it'll be fine. But that's not a helpful phrase necessarily in every situation where a student is stressed. So I really try to avoid at all costs, trying to tell a student, you know, not to worry or calm down, because I don't always know what stressors a student is facing. And they might be facing very, very significant stressors. And it would be not necessarily the most productive thing for me to tell them not to worry. Instead, I try to ask them open-ended questions. Like, you know, you can ask a student, well, are you feeling stressed? And they say either yes or no. But if you ask a student, how are you feeling? Or can you tell me how your body feels? Or can you tell me what emotions you're experiencing right now? Those allow a student to talk and to identify what they're actually experiencing without you putting words into their mouth. And I know I have been guilty of that at times in the past. Finally, don't be the cause of the student's stress. I have to be very mindful, because if I've had a stressful day and I walk into a new school situation, I have to put that behind me. And I have to understand that it's not about me and it's not about the day that I've had, it's about the student at this time. So it is very important to take care of yourself first before we can take care of others. And that's the topic of our next point, is making sure that self-care is not a luxury. And that's kind of a phrase I use, and you'll see it printed out in our slides. Self-care isn't a luxury because it's a necessity. And a lot of times we tell ourselves, you know, oh, I'll make time for self-care later. But it's important to get self-care consistently, so you can always be at least in a state where you can help somebody else. And I know I love the terms that you guys use. You call that, Kathy calls them, you guys, her champions, that you go out and you work with students, and that's what you are. And you are all part of caring professions. And from what I can understand, you are all either have worked in schools or you know, perhaps some have not, but you all care about young people, and that's why you're here. And so caring can be taxing at times for our mental health. And so we're going to talk about that too in part 3. Let's see any current messages. I think we're still good. And I'm checking time. All right, doing good. So part 3, managing our personal stress. This is kind of the part where we're going to talk about, we talked about how we can help students. Now we're going to talk about how we help us so we can help students. And it's exactly what I just said. There we go. It's exactly what I just said, is that self-care and stress management is not a luxury. It has to happen. It's not you being lazy. That's a lot of my peers grew up in environments where taking a day off for mental health was considered, you know, non-essential, was considered lazy. And I know not everyone has that ability at this time, but taking care of ourselves is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's part of taking care of our physical health. It's part of taking care of our emotional health and our mental health. We're just realizing, I believe, better than we ever have, how integrated our mental health and our physical health really is. So neglecting yourself, we know, leads to long-term unsustainability. We can't keep going if we are constantly wearing ourselves down and not taking time for ourselves. So another thing I try to encourage educators and people who work with young people is avoid comparison. I know there are some listening right now who face much, much bigger stressors than I do. I know it's probably, it's just a statistical likelihood. But it's really important, no matter what kind of stressors you're facing, to never compare yourself and never compare the stress that you face to another person's stress. Just because you react differently to stress than another person doesn't mean that you react in the wrong way. It's really important to understand that everybody has their own stress reactions, and that is okay. And your stress is still valid. It's still a very critical part of your health. You need to be able to manage it. You have to make sure it's not getting to the part where you can't handle. And so never compare what you can do to another person, because what you can do is perfect for who you are, essentially. Be aware of the additional stress, and we're talking about this already, but those caring professions tend to be those burnout professions. And so we need to be extra cautious and make sure we take time for stress reduction and management in our own lives when we are helping other people manage their own stress, because it kind of rubs off on people. It's a little bit like a virus in some ways. If one person close to you in your life is experiencing stress, you're probably going to experience more stress because of that. Another thing that I really encourage people to do is to understand themselves. And this sounds a little funny at times, I do grant you, but it's important to understand what kind of a person you are. And some of you are very confident in that. And some of you are young like me, I'm sure, and are still going through understanding who we are as people. And so you can take a personality test. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is really fun if anyone has ever used that before. And it's not a hard science, but what it can do for people is help identify whether or not you are an introverted person or an extroverted person. A lot of times people get their results back and say, of course I'm like that. For me personally, seeing it in more of a technical form was really helpful in understanding that I'm an introverted person, and I need to, in order for me to deal with stress in my life, I need to have time alone. And that was really helpful. I see a question. It says, what are folks doing today is more stressful? Oh, what folks are doing today is more stressful than ever. Virtual teaching. Absolutely. I experienced just a little bit more stress doing a virtual presentation that I normally would live. And I can't imagine what it is like for people who do this on a daily basis. If anyone has any comments or any things that they want to add to that, please feel welcome to raise your hand or type a message, because that is a huge issue. Technological problems are common. I know you are all facing, and virtually learning, absolutely, yeah. I know you are all facing students who have access to things and students whose access is not as good. I know you have students who respond better to learning over online, and some who don't respond as well to online learning. My youngest sister is a freshman at Purdue University this year, and she is struggling with online learning. And, this is even on a college level. I can't imagine what it's like for younger people, but she is struggling academically because she and I are very similar. We both really need a live learning environment for something to stick. And it's heartbreaking that you guys are it's becoming difficult to provide that for every student nowadays. So yeah, that is a really big cause of our stress. And it's important too, you brought up virtual learning. It's important not to compare our virtual learning techniques to another person's, because you are all probably going through a lot of transitions in how you teach and how you educate. It's certainly something that doesn't come naturally for me. And for those of you who have found it a little easier, congratulations. And for those of you who have found it harder, we're all in the trenches together, I believe, because it's a learned skill and it's one that hasn't been taught for very long. So certainly there are stressors there. So know yourself, essentially. Try to find out what helps you, because we can talk about stress relieving techniques all day, but unless you know what works for you, unless you really do what works for you, then it's not going to be as effective. So know what you need to manage your stress, and know that not every technique is going to work, and that's okay. I made a joke earlier about techniques that don't involve massages. Some of you may think a neck massage right now would be the best thing ever. I would be running to another room. I can't stand people touching my neck or my back or anything. That's not relaxing for me, and that's okay. That's just not how I deal with stress. But if some of you are very responsive to those relaxation techniques, that's awesome. Let's see, I see a comment from Amy. One group did the MBE survey last year, and it was good to understand the different personalities of our students. Absolutely, Amy. I really have found that most of the students that I work with are introverted. And I think we kind of talk about that, and I'm open with them with the fact that I'm introverted, and they can't believe it. They said, how are you introverted? You teach students. But introverts come in all shapes and sizes. And there's a really good book I will recommend. It's called Quiet, The Power of Introverts. For my fellow introverts out there, extroverts, I love you too so much, but just a book I've read that was really enjoyable and eye-opening to how introversion is viewed. And I think in a positive note, a lot of our introverted students are feeling more welcome more supported than they ever have before. Obviously, school is an environment that naturally can be maybe a little more welcoming for extroverts at certain times, not always, but lots of people and our introverts have struggled. I am constantly trying to find ways that I can help my introverted students. So if I have an activity before a lesson plan, I'm going to try to make sure that if I have a big group of introverts, we're going to do something maybe like some meditation coloring or something like that. If I have a bunch of extroverts, I might try to play a game that gets their bodies moving and gets them talking with other people. Knowing your students is key to reducing their stress. And I feel like that was a point that I should have made a little bit earlier when we're talking about helping students reduce their own stress, but knowing your students. And that's a hard thing to do, especially online. It is really hard because you can't always see those reactions. You can't always see how students are faring. But in person, I know it was really a challenge for me to learn each individual student and be like, okay, that student I know is really adverse to loud noises, and try to, accommodate them as well. Those are really good comments. Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna go quickly, really quickly through all these because I also want to respect your time. So this is the last part, how we manage and cope with stress. And so I have included 8 different ways. There's no particular one way to manage and cope with stress, but I wanted you to see them in different categories. And so we have number 1 being relaxation. These are ones that are, for some people, the number 1 way they handle stress is those deep breathing exercises. I actually practice a lot of these with my students. They're great things to do in a classroom setting because you don't need anything with you. We do things like bumblebee breathing with some of my younger kids, who you breathe in through your mouth and then you exhale while you hum. You like a bumblebee, and they really enjoy that. That's a lot of fun. And those things can help. The deep breathing works because it's mechanically self-regulating your respiratory rate, which lowers your stress levels. It's amazing how it works. And if you've ever practiced deep breathing yourself, you'll know it really can be an effective form of relaxation. I think sometimes there's a little, when I first tried it, I was like, does this really work? And it really does. Visualization activities are really good for especially creative introverted students to help, picturing a quiet forest or somewhere that brings them a lot of calm. On YouTube, you can also Google or you can search on YouTube for guided meditations. Make sure, listen through them first, make sure it's not necessarily that they're inappropriate, but make sure that they're age appropriate for whatever group you're working with, but those can be really helpful. Aromatherapy is something, I don't practice that in schools at all, just because there's too many allergies that I need to be concerned about. But for individual students that you're working with, if filling the room with maybe a diffuser with a pretty common, like a lavender oil, that can really be helpful. Massage therapy, I mentioned, not for me, but certainly for a lot of other adults. And like I said, these are techniques that can help with any ages. So this is to help us and help our students. But many adults do find that really relaxing, and that's a great way. Exercise, and I put exercise, but I should just put physical movement, because some people de-stress by moving and stretching. Just a couple of days ago, I was working with yoga has been a hit with our students. Awesome. We have I am not a yoga provider, but we have one who works with Meridian, and she's fantastic. And absolutely, it doesn't have to be hard exercise. We have aerobic and anaerobic activities. So you have your running, swimming, and Zumba being extra active, but you can still get that stress relief from walking, stretching, gentle things like yoga, and a lot of things that students use to, I know fidget spinners have been annoying in the classrooms, but as a form of a safe way for them to move, it's a one-site use aromatherapy. Yeah, that's great. As being a healthy way to move, using fidget toys is excellent. I have something in my bag called a squeezy. I've called it my squeezy star. It's a heavy duty rubber star that I try to hand to any student who I see as having some anxiety, and maybe demonstrating that in a tactile way. Okay, a couple more. Nutrition is really important, especially for adolescents, which it's important to understand both for adults and adolescents, that we want a balanced diet and we don't want to restrict. We don't want to call certain foods bad. If you need chocolate, have some chocolate, but everything in balance. And sometimes that anxiety, that stress can come from trying to follow a very restrictive diet. I'm only going to eat salads, or I'm only going to eat things that are low in fats. Not only adults, but students fall into this trap very often. Students are very, very aware of different fad diets or crash diets, and they'll try to lose weight very quickly. What we find is a lot of that is water weight. They're not drinking water very much, and so they're losing a lot of hydration in their bodies, and it's not a healthy way. I tell my students all the time, the only person who can tell you what your weight should be, and if you should adjust your weight in any direction, that's your healthcare provider, that's your pediatrician, that's your doctor, that's your nurses, because a lot of students will get information online that can be very detrimental and tell them that their body should look a certain way, and we know that's absolutely not true. So I have a lesson I do on self-confidence and body image that we talk about that in depth. Staying hydrated with plenty of water. A lot of times if I'm stressed, it will just be a little reminder to me, have you drunk enough water today? And the answer is usually no, it's been all coffee. And that kind of goes down to reducing our caffeine consumption, which is a huge issue for me. Caffeine is a stimulant. We don't think about caffeine being a drug that has an impact on our body, but it absolutely does. So kind of something I recommend is maybe if you can't completely cut out coffee, I love coffee so much. I have a coffee cup with me, so you can tell, try drinking some tea, try having something that maybe has a little bit of lower caffeine and still provides that relaxation ritual of having a hot drink maybe in the morning or in the evening. The ritual aspect of it is really important. It's a calming thing to sit there with a warm mug. You get that tactile sensation, you get the smell, the aroma of the tea. So I treat everything with tea, if you haven't already figured out. I love tea. So having good nutrition, getting quality sleep for adults and adolescents is necessary. And I say quality because quantity may not be an option. I am completely aware that you guys work morning, noon, and night, and there are no breaks. And so when quantity is impossible, try to get the best quality sleep you can, which means that we are resting periodically throughout the day, but also we establish habits that help us fall asleep naturally as soon as possible. For a lot of people, I know that habit might be taking a hot shower before bed, or maybe having downtime from your phone. Your phone emits something called blue light. The light is obviously not blue, but what it does is it mimics sunlight to your brain. And when your brain sees that light, your brain says it's daytime. And that's why it's very easy, and I tell this to my students all the time, I said, that's why it's very easy to be sitting in bed in the dark and scrolling through your phone and just not notice that it's midnight or it's 1 a.m. or it's 2 a.m. Because your brain doesn't know that it's time to sleep. And so giving yourself at least 45 minutes, I try to recommend an hour, but at least 45 minutes before you plan on falling asleep, putting away all your devices, making sure everything is just shut for the night. That helps your brain naturally wind down, especially right now with the fact that it's getting dark around 4 p.m. It's crucial that our brains understand when it's time to be awake and when it's time to be asleep. Establish sleep habits such as sleeping in a cool room tends to help more people than sleeping in a really, really warm room. And then keeping a sleep journal can be helpful. And if not helpful for stress, at least it is enjoyable. I have at times been like, I really wish I remembered that dream the other night. But not necessarily writing down what you dream, but write down how easy it was to fall asleep or what you did the night before. Sometimes you fell asleep because of something you did and you didn't even notice that. I had a friend who one time kept a sleep journal and noticed that she wasn't sleeping well when she ate chocolate before bed. And she had not been aware that chocolate contains caffeine. And so by establishing that sleep journal, she was able to identify a pattern that hindered her sleep. Once she corrected the behavior, her sleep got a lot better. Okay, guys, you have been so patient and I really appreciate that. Last slide, very last slide. Goal setting is something that I try to work with a lot of my students. to help increase self-esteem, but it's something that I need to use on a daily basis to help me manage my productivity. I try to set goals and break down those projects into easier to complete tasks. When I make myself a sheet of all the things that I need to do, it's a little mind-boggling. But when I divide it down into what I can do in the morning or in the afternoon, in the evening, then that suddenly becomes a lot more manageable and my stress is reduced generally, hopefully, right? Setting milestones is really important. Part of our preventing long-term stress, sometimes we get burned out because we fail to take account to how hard we've worked and to all the things we've done. So track your progress, make goals that are manageable and achievable. If it's a goal that's, you know, something that you can't put a time frame on, don't mark that as a goal. It's a good thing to still try for. But I work with students and I say, okay, if your goal is to do better in school, make sure you word that in a way that you can measure when your goal has been met. So for example, if your goal is to be better in school, perhaps you should say something like, my goal is to score at least a B- on the next test that's happening in 3 weeks. That is a time frame. And that's also something you can measure by. Grades are hard a lot of times because I try to work with students who are struggling academically as well. So maybe it's a goal like drinking at least 3 glasses of water a day is a measurable goal. You have a time frame, you know when the goal has been met because you can measure those 3 glasses of water. So setting those goals that you can measure are very helpful. And then I have journaling as something that can help keep stressors from building up inside yourself. It can make it easier for you to recognize the circumstances that have been happening in your own life. I know it's something that was really intimidating for me when I was an adolescent because I didn't know what to write about. And it wasn't until I was much older that I learned you don't have to write about anything in particular. You can't journal wrong. Just writing those stressors down, even writing down words of how you feel, can help you identify patterns in your behavior and then apply things that might help reduce your stress. And obviously it would be, I could not end this without saying if a student is experiencing stress in degrees that are interfering with their daily life or affecting their hobbies, if they're not engaging in things that they used to, encourage that student seek help, seek a counselor, seek a therapist, and get mental health. And the same applies for every adult that's listening. Meridian Healthcare does provide counseling services, but there's a lot of really great places here in Mahoning County and in Trumbull County that provide mental health care. And do not be ashamed to ever reach out when you need help, because everybody needs help. I tell my students constantly that needing mental health care is like going to the doctor when you have the flu, right? No one would question that. Or when you have a broken leg. Everyone has experienced mental health problems, and that is normal. And so when we experience that, getting the help we need is not being selfish, it's being best for ourselves. It's having healthy bodies, healthy minds, so that hopefully we can help other people be healthy. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. If anyone has any questions, you are more than welcome. Kathy, and especially Amy and Kathy, you guys have been very patient, and I really appreciate everybody's attention. I appreciate your participation. I hope you all have a great evening.
I would just wanted to say something, and I'm sure Aim will too. Just thank you so very much, Michaela, for your time in putting this information together. It would be great maybe if you could send that PowerPoint to Amy and myself. That would be great.
I did right before the thing, so you have it.
Yes. So I
send that out to other people.
And just one other thing too, I just wanted to say, and then Aim, I'll toss it to you and you can close it out. I think that all of these things that you shared with us, not just with students, but how we deal with each other at our respective sites and our families and our friends, we can all use those coping and managing stress things that are going on in our life now more than ever. Aim, take it home.
Yeah, and so I did send to the coordinators the copies of the slideshow, so feel free to share those. But thanks for everybody. I mean, we had great participation. Thank you, staff, for getting on, and Michaela, especially, thank you so much. You did a great job with your presentation. Really, great. We were so glad to have you. And everybody, we've got some time, in a couple weeks that you'll have a couple weeks off. you know, a couple days here and there off. So take some time to just take a deep breath and, you know, spend some time with your family and, you know, get ready for the second half of the year. But you all have been doing great. And it's such a hard new, I mean, we've never done this before. And everybody, I'm impressed and so thankful for, you know, being troopers about this uncharted territory and, you know, working hard to, you know, meet the needs of our kids and our families. So great job, you know, everyone. I miss having these PDs in person because I get to see, you know, everybody, but, you know, thank you. Thank you, Michaela. I really appreciate
Thank you
it.
guys, everybody, thank you.
All right, have a good night.
Oh, there we go.
Michaela, you did such a great job. You're a really good presenter, and it's tough, you know, virtually, but you have such, oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Amy. I was just saying, I appreciate the opportunity so much. And I apologize for any confusion. Hopefully the whole Zoom thing that we were talking about earlier wasn't too difficult, but
No,
if anyone, I can be on for a little bit longer. I know you guys are all dismissed, but if anyone has any questions, you are more than welcome to ask them at this time. I really don't mind at all. I'm not on a schedule.
Thanks for sharing your contact information because you never know, you know, sometimes folks like to kind of reach out, you know.
Yes, and if anyone, that's another thing I did want to add, if anyone wants to reach out, I know that Amy and you all have my contact information, so you are welcome to share that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, thanks for your time. I will talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.